aren't here yet. And before you kind of jump into your comments, why don't we do a quick round of introductions, if that's okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's start right over here. Well, you know me, I'm Paul Jewell with WSAC. We'll go with you next, Mitch.
I'm Mitch with WSAC.
Yeah, I'm Marco Zayas from Clallam County.
Hello.
And I'm Heather Dudley Nolette from Jefferson County.
Derek Young, Interim Director with WSAC.
Jane Fuller, County Council Member from San Juan County.
Good evening, Lisa Janicki from Skagit County.
Yeah, good to see.
Kevin Overbay, Chelan County.
John Neal, Okanagan County.
John General, Ponderay County. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Dan Sutton, Douglas County.
Zach Trudell, Ferry County.
Gunnar Fulmer from Walla Walla County. Thank you for coming.
Yeah,
And Jamie Budden, WSAC staff. I work on public health issues.
wonderful.
Curtis Steinhauer, WSAC staff, work on human service issues.
Wonderful.
And then over here, you're gonna have to grab a microphone.
Travis Dutton, WSAC staff.
Kelsey Hulse, contract lobbyist with WSAC.
Director Josh Weiss, also contract lobbyist.
Yeah, good to see you.
Commissioner Swanek, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
Art Swanek, Whitman County Commissioner. Sorry I'm
Hello.
late.
No, I think I'm early apparently. So
Just a few minutes.
we're okay.
But that's okay. So this is usually reserved for the chair. And
Yeah.
since the chair is not presiding over this meeting tonight, we're going to leave it right here for you. And that back row, they can get a little unruly sometimes. So if you've got any athleticism at all, you might have an opportunity to put that on display tonight.
There you go.
All right.
Denny Heck's use of the gavel was very judicious.
Yes. We'll
Yeah.
turn it over to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me. And then what I'll do is I'll speak for a couple of minutes. Really just want to make time to answer questions as well. There's a few folks that I've met already. I've been making the tour around Washington State. But first off, thank you for the kind introduction. And really, I do believe that the counties are the backbone of the public service that we do in Washington State. You have this unique ability to bridge that gap between what the state is doing, what the local levels and the cities are doing as well. So it's an important role that you play. And I'm really deeply honored to be here as well. So for those who don't know, I'm Joe Nguyen. I am the Director of Commerce here in Washington State. I've been in this role for the past 3 months. 3.5 months ago, I was a state senator out of the West Seattle area in the 34th Legislative District. Like Paul had said, I was chair of the Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee. I was also the vice chair of Ways and Means as well. I don't think that that's ever happened before, where somebody was a chair of a major committee and also a budget writer at the same time. I didn't look that up. My staff did. They mentioned it to me. I assume that they're correct. I didn't check ChatGPT, so I'm assuming that they're good to go. And what's interesting is that my family came from Vietnam in the 80s. I was born and raised in this area in White Center. My background has nothing to do with public policy. I have nothing to do with the public sector. When I ran for office, it was, at a time where I felt that we needed leadership who reflected the values of the community. And what was funny is that when I ran for office, most folks said, well, that's cute. You want to run for office? Good for you. It was a race against 11 people, and there was clearly a favored person who had all the money and all the resources, which is neither here nor there. We're good friends now. We're both doing fine. But what's interesting is that in that race where I was told that I had no shot of winning, that everybody else would have more money, everybody else would have more endorsements, therefore I couldn't win, it confused me the entire time because I thought you needed more votes. I thought the whole point of running for office was getting more votes. So I knocked on 29,000 doors in a race where, I'm pretty sure I knocked on more doors than anybody else and ended up winning with 58% of the vote. And then what ended up happening was after I got started, people said, oh, this process is pretty complex, it's pretty cumbersome. There's no way you're gonna know how to do it. You're not gonna be able to hit the ground running. So I spent, from November until January down in Olympia. I would drive down most days and then work with staff to kind of figure out what that process looks like. And I created this process doc. My background is in tech. We like to document everything. And what's interesting is that that document was very helpful for me to figure out things such as the rules committee. I didn't know what that was when I came in. I went from not knowing what it was to being able to actually get onto it and then learn what that process looked like. So what's funny is that for somebody who was not supposed to be there, who didn't know what they were doing, I seemed to be just fine. And what was interesting is that the folks who were there the longest were the ones that I thought they didn't seem to be doing things that I thought were, in the best interest of what Washington State wanted, nor were they doing it in a more effective way. So that kind of ethos has really translated into the work that I did in the legislature. So to go from you don't belong here to let's just put you in charge of a major committee, and then the budget, I thought was interesting. We talked about the CCA. I'm not even reading my notes at this point. I'm just going to riff. So I remember my first year as a budget writer. So I had the tremendous opportunity and privilege to write the CCA budget for the Senate. And the way that the legislature works is people are generally lazy. So what ends up happening is if you're the first person to do something, 80% of the times, you got it. That's it. Whatever you propose likely happens. So I knew that going in. So I worked with my staff to write the CCA budget. And I remember the first tranche was $1 billion, and then I did another $1 billion. So can you imagine, it's just late at night one day, I write a budget and it's $1 billion and I give it to staff. And the staff says, "Thank you, Senator. We'll go ahead and get this process. Appreciate it." And I just paused. I said, wait. You guys should read it and make sure I didn't mess it up. So what's interesting to me was, as somebody who doesn't have a background in government, I felt like we needed more rigor around how we did things. And that was unusual. That was unusual when we're talking about billions and billions of dollars. So fast forward until Christmas Eve, governor called me and said, "Hey, I'd love for you to come to the administration and lead the Department of Commerce." So for people who don't know, the Department of Commerce has 485 programs. I didn't actually know this until about a month ago, because there's no way to find out unless you look at all the accounts that are still alive. So the Department of Commerce has 485 different programs. It's everything from affordable housing, behavioral health, mental health, energy efficiency, decarbonization, GMA, small business and clean technology innovations, economic development across all 39 counties. So most walks of life are covered by the Department of Commerce. It's an $8 billion budget that we have. $8 billion. If the Department of Commerce was a private company traded on the stock market, we would be a Fortune 500 firm. It is that big. So what I've been telling my staff and my team for the last 3 months is that, look, I get that this is a big responsibility, but just to be very clear, these programs don't belong to us. And these dollars don't belong to us. They belong to the people of Washington State, and they belong to the communities that we have been tasked to serve. And we are just simply stewards of these funds. And what I'll say is that is an unusual statement. Most folks in my office have not heard that perspective before. So we've been entrusted with this awesome responsibility across so many different programs that impact so many of the lives across Washington State. And what's interesting is that I'll kind of lead to another acronym that I use as well. It's called OPM, right? So I get that we're stewards of these funds, but what that means to me is that you have to have a level of rigor and credibility and trust for us to actually have the faith of the communities as we serve them. So I don't know if you guys have heard this. It's called OPM, other people's money. So there's this concept that I've seen in the public sector where, because it's OPM, you don't treat it with the same level of due diligence and rigor that you would with your own personal funds. Right? Like this happened to me with actually the state vehicles, where, how like when you rent a car, you're not cleaning the car, you're not detailing the car. I borrowed one of the state vehicles for the first time. The tires were low. The windshield wiper fluids were out. It's an electric vehicle. So first off, that's fine. That it wasn't charged. And then what I also noticed was that there's a giant sticker on the windshield. I'm totally making stuff, like I'm just digressing, but there's a sticker that said, "Change the oil every 7,000 miles. So for folks who don't know, electric vehicles don't have oil. So I'm like, this is a very expensive car. And we just didn't actually care about how we take care of it. And it really was frustrating. So I fixed all that stuff. I ripped off all of the stickers and all the Commerce vehicles. I told them that I did it, but I was like, these stickers make us look bad. So my point being is that we need to ensure that we treat every public dollar as if it was our own, with the same care, with the same purpose, and with measurable outcomes. Because trust isn't just built on good intentions or from talking points. Trust has to be delivered and it has to be earned. So what I've told my team as well is that government shouldn't just be a place where you turn when things go wrong, because usually that's what happens. If you're working with government, I would bet that's not a good day, right? Like if you're working with citing or permitting, it's probably tough. Corrections probably tough, but the commerce every day and every interaction should be a good one, right? If you look at the ethos of commerce, what we functionally do is we go around the entire state and we give away money to people to be successful. We are the Oprah of Washington state agencies. Like you want to get a grant, you got a grant. You want broadband, we'll get you broadband. You want housing, we'll get you housing. That is what commerce does across Washington state. And honestly, I think this moment is too important for anything less than that type of energy and that type of rigor when it comes to how we operate. Because, one thing I'll say is, as you can tell, I'm pretty candid, and I'll be honest that we've done a lot of things right in Washington state. We've gotten some great, climate laws. We've built coalitions. We have business and local governments and environmental groups all kind of working together on certain things. But candidly, I think we're falling short in a number of very important ways that our county leaders can really help us step up on and do much better, right? We're not building housing fast enough. We're not reaching rural and underserved communities fast enough. We're not delivering energy infrastructure fast enough. And we've let red tape get in the way of the very outcomes that I think a lot of us actually agree with. And this has economic ripples across the entire state. And lately, I've been reading a book by Ezra Klein. Most people have known about it by now. It's called Abundance, where really the main premise is that we've gotten so focused on defending process that we've lost sight of the task. We've lost sight of why we're actually doing the things that we're doing. So we say yes to clean energy, but we build it like we're scared. We say yes to housing, but it takes years to permit. We say yes to electrify everything, but we can't build transmission lines, where we've built a culture of caution and complexity when what we need now is a culture of urgency, outcomes, and trust, right? Urgency, outcomes, and trust. And that culture shift can't come from Olympia alone. It has to come from partnerships with our counties and our nonprofit organizations and our local jurisdictions that work with us. And for folks who don't know me, I tend to be very goal-oriented. I like checklists. So in my first 60 days as director, I made a promise to the governor that I'd visit all 212 chambers of commerce in Washington state. So not that I'm only visiting chambers, just that it's a good proxy. People get mad whenever I say that. They're like, "What about the counties? What about the nonprofits?" I'm like, I just need a list. But that's just a proxy of who I visit. So, I visited Spokane, Tri-Cities, Moses Lake, Everett, Bellingham, Seattle, of course, where I live, Olympia. So we've already had over 50 plus meetings with over 80 organizations across the entire state. And it's not just a checkbox where I'm just trying to go through. I want to listen to everybody to hear really what's going on. And what I'm hearing is pretty consistent, to be honest with you. And really what I believe is that our communities are ready. I think the talent is there. There's even capital that's available as well. But all too often, we're getting in our own way. And that's why I really want to focus commerce and the state to move from process to partnership, because that's how we unlock the potential that's already there, right? And what's interesting is that nobody's a monolith, but I certainly see kind of trends in terms of how things happen. And the issues that we face are not necessarily unique. There's certainly nuances associated with it. But every single community, I found folks who are very passionate, and there's just random little things that get in the way, right? So for one, childcare is important. I met with the childcare provider in Tri-Cities. They had mentioned that they actually have a slew of providers that are ready and willing to provide services for childcare. But a lot of times, especially if it's in-home care, they need a window or an egress or a door to get going because of code. That costs $3,000 to $5,000. They may or may not have $3,000 to $5,000 to front. If the state had some revolving loan fund to help them pay for these upgrades, they can open up and then pay it back. I talked to small business owners, and they're small business owners, they're starting off, they're renters. When you're getting a license, a business license through L&I, if you're a renter, your landlord has to approve you being able to do a business, not even in the house, just that you have to have a home address for your business. So if your landlord says, no, you can't have a business license, then you have no place to go, right? There's all kinds of things like that that happen in Washington state that we've been learning. So, we're helping counties in a number of ways, whether it's through housing, whether it's through energy, whether it's through economic development. But really, my main premise is that, for a lot of things, we can't wait on Congress. We have to use state tools to accelerate how we do things, whether it's siting and permitting, whether it's economic development. These are the things that are possible if we all actually work together. So if we're serious about closing the energy and economic opportunity gap, we need to do, I think, three things. Washington State and our counties need to do three things. We have to rebuild public trust. People need to see outcomes, not just announcements. So I actually don't like press conferences or photo ops because I think that they take so much time. But that's one. We need to actually build public trust in how we operate. We need to put people over process. And I'm not saying, skipping safeguards or, not addressing important things, but we need to make sure that we're putting the people in front of that process. One example of how that manifests in Washington State, I just learned this recently. So if you're in Washington State and you want access to a grant at Commerce, you probably need a government affairs official because it's hard to navigate. You probably need a grant writer because that's a full-time job just going through the compliance. You probably need some sort of auditor or some sort of legal advice to make sure that you're getting through correctly. So if you're going after, functionally a $1 million grant, you probably need to spend $400,000 just to even qualify for that, right? And even if you're lucky enough to get that grant, all grants are governed by what's called SAM. It's the State Administrative, I see a lot of nodding heads. The State Administrative and Accounting Manual. That document is 1,067 pages. 1,067 pages. So basically, in order to even get a grant in Washington State and to comply, you have to read the Lord of the Rings, but the whole thing, all Lord of the Rings. That's about how long the state manual is in order to comply. So you have all these regulatory hurdles that, over time just compounds and compounds. Plus you have the federal level, plus you have the program guidelines, plus you have budget provisos as well. And there's not a lot of flexibility in terms of how that operates. And God forbid if the feds change their minds and they actually want something different after the fact, which has happened to us. So my whole point is that we've lost sight of what we're actually trying to do. We're more focused on these processes that we're going to try to break down and fix. I have some suggestions how to do so. I won't talk about that in the speech right now, but if folks want to ask questions later, because I actually think that we can make this process better. And the last one is, we have to center the people, right? The people in this whole process. That means rural infrastructure, tribal leadership, labor, frontline communities. They all have to be baked into our plans. When I was a legislator, I like to think that I had a reputation for getting things done. I don't know, you guys can decide if that was true or not, but mainly the reason why I thought that I was successful was because I did three things when I would ever run a bill. I would talk to somebody who disagreed with me. I would talk to somebody who had to implement the thing that we wanted to do. And then I would talk to somebody who would be impacted by that thing. And most of the times, once you are able to have those conversations, even if they don't agree, you're likely to pass a bill. So my big thing here is that Commerce wants to be a good partner. Governor Ferguson and his administration has been pretty clear that we want to cut red tape and want to get stuff done and want to be able to build, but we have to do it together as well. So I guess my ask to this group and to the folks online is that we can't we can't treat these problems like somebody else is going to fix it. We can't let, public funds be treated like other people's money. These are our dollars, our people, our future. And I believe that we must rise to this moment with urgency and clarity because that's what it's going to take for us to get through. Washington State, I think, is in a unique position at this moment of time to be a leader on so many things. And I think our counties are well positioned to be, at the forefront of that as well. So that's my spiel. I don't know. I'm a little bit tired, so I just kind of just talked about whatever. But if I can answer any questions, I'd love to help.
Well, thank you, Director. We have a bit of a tradition here. When people have a question, they put their tent up.
Yeah.
And so when you see those, just feel free to, if you can read them, go ahead and call them by name. If you can't, gesture, I think, is just as good.
Good evening. Really happy to have you here. Appreciate your time here. Although I'm a county commissioner now, I spent 30 years as a chief financial officer of family business
I know of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've been, I know, I failed at that, so I went into government. No.
You and me both.
I always think of the Department of Commerce as the place where all lost programs go. It's
Yeah.
like if they don't have a logical home, it goes to the Department of Commerce.
That's right.
And I guess that's one like seeing project manager under your bio information is there are so many hidden gems within the department, but is there a way to look at that organizational structure perhaps and streamline even some of the administration of so many different programs? Is that something that you're going to be looking at? As
I've
a
already
director?
started. So the first off, my leadership style is one where you can only change the culture as vast as the culture allows. And I think that I don't fault folks. I'm not trying to point fingers, but when you have an organization, 6 years ago, Commerce was about 200 people, maybe $1 billion. Now it's over 800, over $8 billion. It grows pretty fast. And that was during the pandemic as well. So I've uncovered things that do not make me very happy, nor do I think was very efficient or effective for the people of Washington State. There is new leadership at Commerce. So the folks who were there during that time, I appreciate their leadership during that time. This is not that moment anymore for them. And we've done things to ideally centralize a lot of the work that we do. Most of what Commerce does, about 80%, is actually grant making. You would expect an organization that is $8 billion, where most of your work is grant making, to have a contracts division that helps you actually create contracts and align them. You would expect there to be a system in place like a CMS to help you gather the receipts and the invoices and checks them to make sure that they're done well. You would expect that there are internal controls to ensure that if there's anything that's inappropriate, they would be flagged. That's what I expected. So, but it's okay. I think a lot of it is that people were doing the best of what they could at that time. And what's interesting is that even when you look at kind of what's happening now, what's most fascinating to me is that we have such tremendous assets of people at Commerce. You have phenomenal individuals who are very passionate about their roles. A lot of them have master's degrees. And what we're functionally asking them to do right now is basic accounting. It's AR, AP, accounts payable, accounts receivables. That's what we're asking them to do. So master's degrees in energy development. They're checking receipts. So I actually had my team, I built, my background's in tech, so this is not as hard as it sounds, but I built a AI chatbot and I put in the state manual along with federal guidelines and a sample contract provision. And I fed it 3 invoices to see how it would receive it and flag if things are right or wrong. And it worked. So we're building right now a tool where my staff, instead of spending 80% of their time checking invoices and receipts, this tool is going to flag them for them and say, these are good, these are not good, check these first. Because I want them to focus their energy on developing the best program and working with their communities, not checking receipts. That's not why they were hired. So that'll give us more rigor as well. Also, what I've noticed is that people were very much just trying to duct tape things and kind of, again, no offense to previous leaders. One person was there for 8 years. That was great. That was before it became big. Director Brown was great, but she was running for mayor. The previous director, Fong, was fine, but he came in and said, I'm a lame duck. I'm going to be gone in 18 months. You can imagine the level of respect you're going to get if you tell people you're going to leave. So my tone is very different. And I think because of that, folks are going to take it a little bit more seriously as well. Heather. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I didn't even look over that side. Sorry. Is it John? Oh, Gunner's next? Okay. Yeah. I'm not here until 8. You guys are here until 8.
Thank you, Director. I want to start with an observation, and it sounds like you're all over this. But I think it's important that you are hearing it from the counties. As you can well imagine, with the pace Commerce has grown at, we are frequently in meetings with Commerce where there is no expertise from Commerce.
Oh, I
So
agree.
I just
Yeah.
want to be very clear
Yeah.
about that. Some frustrating, and so I'm leading with questions like, when did you start there, so I can get an idea of how serious to take
I would
this.
also expect from an organization that has 800 people and $8 billion, a consistent training program, especially on contracts. That's her job.
But question observation that you're probably also already on top of. If you've done 50 site visits, all of the things are unlocked by the infrastructure, and that's what we're stuck on. And it doesn't even matter what the question is, if it's childcare, if
Yeah.
it's housing, if it doesn't even, we're stuck on power. And so I guess my question is, that seems like a tremendous challenge, and somehow Commerce did end up with that.
Yeah.
New transmission and
I wrote
the
the bills for them.
backlogs. What is your plan
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. So I actually wrote the bills for the portfolio that is now at Commerce and the investments that are there as well. So that was kind of a unique position to be in. First off, the three things that I hear kind of generally speaking at most of these visits is we need energy, because if you don't have energy, you can't do anything else, like you said. The other one is we need housing, because if you don't have housing, then the other part is we need a workforce. So all those things to me are intertwined, and those are all projects that I worked on while in the legislature as well. In a more pragmatic level, what we need is transmission lines. So what I think is actually fascinating is if you look at the technology available to us. So I don't even care which one you decide, but like whether it's wind, solar, nuclear, doesn't matter. We actually have the technology and the land and the wind to build enough infrastructure to meet our demands today. We don't need to wait for fusion, which we may have fusion, so that's great. But even then, that needs infrastructure. So the challenge that we have is not, can we build these things? Do we have the technology available to us? The answer is clearly yes, if we chose to. The limitations that we have are all bureaucratic. It's all permitting, it's all siting, it's all EIS, it's all that stuff. It's all stuff that we put into place. So are there ways for us to break down some of those silos? I think the answer is also yes. So, you know, I can wax poetic as much as you want, but for me, a lot of it is there are ways for us to better prioritize the investments that we make. For housing, we can look at rent burdened counties or zip codes. For transmission lines, we can look at opportunity corridors where we know that that is advantageous. For energy, we know where it's sunny, we know where it's windy. PNL has done a lot of great studies. We also know that we have opportunities with SMRs because of the history of nuclear that we have in Washington State. And the other one too is that if you look at the planning that the state has done, none of that accounts for load growth of, say, for instance, data centers, right? So even our research and our reports are actually wrong. So that is an area of focus where if I wasn't at Commerce, I'd probably be doing something in the energy space. And I have some thoughts around how that would look. It is a little bit awkward for me to have left that post at the Senate because, again, I don't know who would take up some of that work because it's actually pretty boring, right? Everybody talks about energy. Nobody talks about transmission lines. They don't talk about siting. They don't talk about permitting, but that's actually how you get it done. So right now, one of the things that I've done is I've traveled the state to meet with our counties around energy policies. I've also met with all of the tribes as well, because I think a lot of that has to go through historical tribal lands. So for me, the only way for us to actually meet our energy future is if we do it in partnerships with our counties and with our tribes, because the biggest barriers that I see is that when an energy development company comes in and they don't have that credibility and trust, it goes south pretty fast. I'm not sure that answers your question, but that's my general thought process. Yeah. Gunnar. I'm just using your first name because I can see it easier, but I would Commissioner and your last name, but I'll just
First
go.
name's perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Director, appreciate you being here again. I know I mentioned that earlier. One of the problems that we're having is that, Washington State has kind of taken a stance to our opioid crisis is that it's a big deal and
Yeah.
we're concerned about it. Just this last weekend alone in Walla Walla County, we lost 3 lives in a day and a half due to opioid overdose. It is such a big deal to our county that we stood up a task force when we couldn't afford to do it. And all entities came in and put a body in there. When law enforcement short staffing across our state. The money that has been coming from the federal government through the Department of Commerce has been shaved for our task forces. In fact, this year we got 0. So as a county, we got to start thinking outside the box, and we're going to fund them for the next 2 years with our opioid money.
Yeah.
But we're lucky to have that to do that. Otherwise, our task force would be disbanding. What is your plan in that area? My background is law enforcement. I was an interdiction officer. That's what I did. So I have a pretty good understanding of how that works. And my personal opinion is that our state has taken the stance in the drug world of putting everything on the reactive side instead of the proactive side. I often use the analogy that we continue to buy shop vacs for the flood, but we don't try to turn the water off.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious what your plan is in that area, since our task forces aren't getting any money and they literally are the ones across the state that are taking the most drugs off the streets, so that it isn't getting to our kids. There also are our human traffic teams, and our serious crime teams for a lot of the gang violence, and
Yeah.
which it's all intertwined. You know that.
Yeah, I
fact.
think it's a continuum.
So I'm just
I would
curious
say.
what your stance is. Are you going to try to get funding back to our task forces, or what do you think?
I don't know about the task forces specifically. So there's the opioid settlement money that has come in, and depending on the jurisdictions, there is programmatic funding for it. Most of that actually goes to the state. I actually helped with some of those fundings as well, and it came kind of late, but they come in tranches. So what I would probably recommend for you is that if there isn't already a champion in the legislature who is working on money specifically for the task force, that's one avenue. There is a pot of money specifically for this that only can go towards this. I helped structure some of those funds. Some of them are capital. I think that's one. When it comes to resources as well, models that I've seen be very successful are ones that partner with tribes, mainly because tribes have access to Medicaid dollars for behavioral and mental health clinics that nobody else has access to. So whether you look at Quinault, whether you look at Lummi and other places, they're able to build community health facilities that can actually take people in and treat them without actually using their own resources because the feds have Medicaid dollars to match. So if there's a tribe in your area that doesn't already have one, they're just now kind of starting them up. Quinault was one of the first. Lummi is next, and there's other ones that are being built. So that's one way to access some of these resources. And they don't, like the Quinault Nation, they don't have theirs on reservation land. They have it in Aberdeen. So they're partnering with the local jurisdiction. So I'd recommend that from a resource perspective as well. In terms of the continuum, I think public safety is a key component of what you're describing. Governor Ferguson has announced that he would like to have $100 million towards law enforcement recruitment. How do we actually help and get enough people on the ground to mitigate these things? Public safety was one of the biggest campaign promises that he made on the trail, and he is a person that would kind of deliver as well. So I think those are some of the ways that you kind of help stem up front. Is it perfect? Not quite sure. Depends on each community. The other part too is that when you have communities that are devastated by, say, for instance, industries that are no longer there, we also certainly see a rise in some of the behavioral mental health issues that leads to addiction. So for me, economic development and jobs is part of it too. And then also you have to have the healthcare facilities that aren't necessarily there. So we do have behavioral health dollars. We do have substance use dollars at Commerce that we try to deploy. What's interesting is that we actually were caught in an audit where we failed, and I would do the exact same thing again. The proviso language that was given to us was so restrictive that there are people who want to build and operate these things in our counties, and they have a site for them. We technically couldn't based off of that language. One of the properties we did it anyway, and we got in trouble. I met with the auditor yesterday. So we have a path where if I break the rules, I'm going to write down why, and hopefully they don't get us in trouble. So it's a whole host of things that need to happen for us to actually address this, where you mitigate the impacts when it comes to the flow of what's happening that's coming in. We do have resources from the opioid settlements that we can utilize to deploy healthcare resources. I do think that it has to be in partnership with our tribes for a variety of reasons, including that they have access to Medicaid dollars that we do not, and that we have to provide opportunities so that folks don't fall into this cycle as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I apologize if I'm not hearing you correctly, but it sounds like you're speaking a lot to the treatment part of it, which we absolutely need. I don't disagree with that. But what are we doing on the front side of that, of actually taking the drugs off the street? That's what I'm talking about, is removing the drugs before they actually get to people.
Yeah.
Because obviously we'll never get the other side fixed if we don't cut that stream of flow of drugs coming into our state and getting to our communities. And so I don't disagree with you at all on having more resources to get folks fixed up and get them back on track so that we get more labor force and all these things you've been talking about. But I just feel like we put very little energy into actually taking drugs off the street. And that's what our police officers are not doing that. They don't have
Yeah.
the time, they may get a good traffic stop and get something like that, but to work backwards and get to the cartels that are embedded in our areas and things like that are actually bringing those big flows of drugs into our communities.
Yeah.
The task forces are the only ones that can do that. And so I guess that was my main question. And I'd just like to see the state go a little bit,
What does
do a
that
little
look
bit
like to
better
you?
job on the front end of that.
Obviously, we had some contentious bills around substance use over the past couple of years. We modified it so that way it was more aligned with what our law enforcement agencies want. We have state patrol, which doesn't do drug trafficking, right?
No,
So
they
it's not in
don't.
my purview, but I'm curious to see what does that mean to you in terms of getting at it from the front? Because that's more of a local jurisdiction or a
No,
fed.
yeah, you're not wrong at all. And just not to get into my deep background, but I am still the president of Pacific Northwest Police Detection Dog Association. We do all the narcotic and bomb dogs in the Pacific Northwest, which includes Alaska.
Yeah.
And our state patrol does very little interdiction compared to most states. I think right now, currently, they have 3 narcotic dogs in service. And I've been told by those troopers that come to our conference that they are not allowed to just go out and do interdiction. They have to do their traffic duties as well, which is not really how you do interdiction. But yeah, and that's kind of the point I'm trying to make, is that our state just doesn't really put a lot of resources into stopping that flow of drugs coming into the state and into our communities. I'd like to see a little bit better approach there, because we're not going to save lives if we don't get the drugs off the streets.
Yeah.
We're going to continue just to work in the background and try to build more centers for help and things like that, which that side's needed too. I'm not arguing that at all, but we got to try to get it under
We all
control.
play a role.
So,
Yeah.
but thank
I
you,
appreciate
Director.
it.
I appreciate it.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm Heather Dudley Nolette. I'm from Jefferson County. And I think I'm going to stick in the housing spectrum for just a minute. That's actually the work that I did prior to becoming a commissioner. So I'm also just 3 months into my new job. So you seem like you're hitting the ground running, and I appreciate it. And I had a lot of interaction with commerce in my previous job. So I want to start with a really positive interaction, which was through your HMIS team. Your Homeless Management Information System team is brilliant.
Good.
And so much better than they used to be. And that is such an important system. And I will say one of the things they're doing really well is getting out into the communities and training new agencies how to use HMIS and why it's so important to collect that data accurately.
Good.
So although, some of our tools in the community aren't always working, like our pit counts are still not very accurate at all. And I think there needs to be a lot of support in the communities to make those point in time counts a lot more useful. Your HMIS team is just incredible problem solvers. They're really getting out there and working with agencies. So my question for you with regard to housing is kind of twofold. You talked about permitting being certainly a barrier, and certainly working within counties. I can't imagine there's a single county here that doesn't struggle with their community development and permitting processes and making them efficient.
Yeah.
So one part of my question is around how you would envision commerce helping with that. It seems like, that's something that's pretty localized for us, but if there's
still ways.
but if there are thoughts about that, I would love to hear how we could partner on those kinds of things to smooth barriers for creating housing. And the other thing I'd love to hear more about is the competitive nature of the grant process. What you think about that? Is it the best way to go? And some detail around what I have experienced in being a housing provider in the community, and what I now see in our community, is that housing providers are out there competing with one another and kind of dancing for whatever the funding du jour is. In this case, it's been permanent supportive housing for quite some time.
Yeah.
Whether we need permanent supportive housing or more permanent supportive housing or not, that's the money that's there. And so we're going to go for that. And I'm really interested in the idea of vetting agencies that are doing good work and that are building that housing. It's kind of creating more of a spectrum from affordable to homeless, and how Commerce can work with agencies that are doing that good work and potentially support them, as opposed to making them compete with their neighbors,
Yeah.
other agencies.
Well, I think here, there's a few different questions there. First, for housing, it's cap stack and cap rate, right? If you can't get a project to pencil out, you're not going to be able to build it. And I gave a presentation to Senate Ways and also House Capital on housing specifically in Washington State. So the Housing Trust Fund, which we administer, has had about $2 billion of investments since Frank Chop started it in the 80s. And most of that, 90% of it was in the last 6 years, because it was partially federal funds. And there's a huge tranche that was put in this year as well, knock on wood, should they approve it. Even historic investments in the last 6 years into the Housing Trust Fund, only accounts for about 2% of the housing that we need on an annual basis to hit what we believe is the number to get more affordable housing. So Commerce put together a report based off of HB 1220 that had to have regions plan for housing. We've identified that we need about 1.1 million units of housing in 20 years, starting in 2020. And we also need about 90,000 units of transitory housing, so shelters, things like that. During the pandemic, interest rates were low, your cap rates were good, you built a lot of housing. Interest rates are no longer low, your cap rates are no longer good, it's actually hard to build housing. So we're seeing a pretty drastic drop off. So that's one of the hardest things, and you can't really, like I at Commerce can't control interest rates, and also I can't control tariffs. So if there are things that happen that make it more expensive, that makes it more difficult for housing. The things that we can control are around streamlining of permitting. There was a bill associated with that. Everybody says permitting is bad. They don't know why. The reason why they don't know it's why, because everything is different depending on where you are. The permitting requirements on one block could literally be different than the next permit on another block, right? So part of what we're doing is, if you look at legislation, and I'll admit that I voted yes on these two bills, there's a middle housing bill 1110, and there's a ADU bill 1337. I did not notice when I voted on the bills that the definition of density is different in both bills, which causes a lot of harmonization issues. What you also don't notice is that oftentimes there's a bill that had passed previously, or there's a local jurisdiction that had code that conflicts with what's happening now. So most of your time is spent just trying to decipher what is right or wrong. And if you don't get it right, you're going to get sued by the local whatever group that doesn't want housing. So that's one of the things that we can do is we're working with Microsoft and other folks to really analyze and review, and we're going to prioritize key corridors where in these areas where we know we for sure want housing, how do we ensure that that permitting process is streamlined? And part of that is understanding where we need to harmonize it. I pitched the governor the other day, or his staff the other day, on a plan that I have. It's called Fast Track Wall. I can't talk about it too much because it's not approved by anybody. But basically, it takes the concept of how do you treat this like the emergency that it is, and then how do you remove a lot of the regulatory barriers that don't need to exist? A lot of the things, if you say, for instance, were to build housing in Washington State, there's a lot of things that you have to comply with that have nothing to do with housing, that has nothing to do with the safety of that housing, that costs you a lot of money. If we were to put out $1 million for the Housing Trust Fund, I would say probably 22%, 25% goes towards things that have nothing to do with housing. So how do we remove that barrier? So I have a strategy that's kind of bold that is going to require us telling some of our friends no. I think that's probably going to be one of the hard parts, is that nobody wants to tell your friends no. And we have to do that if we want to actually be serious about building housing. That's the other one. In terms of the competitive nature of the grants for the Housing Trust Fund specifically, that's just what happens, right? So when you have a pot of money, we were oversubscribed in the Housing Trust Fund by about 10x. So of the projects that we're able to fund, there were, 10x other projects that could have been funded. What we could do better is what's called a managed pipeline. So even if you don't have that funding right now, what happens today is that you just start over next year. So if you're a housing developer, it usually takes multi-years anyways. What ends up happening is that you just got to start over, and then you have to scramble to close that capital stack, which is timely and it's costly. Even if we were to say, hey, we ran out for this much, but you're next on the list, you can go shop that with your bank or with the capital market and get it funded, and they'll use that. The other thing that's a problem too with locales is that not everybody is King County. Not everybody has a bunch of planners. So Commerce does have grants for planning and for workforce development, specifically for planners. So we will help with technical assistance, but also literally just help you hire people to be able to do that work. A lot of communities as well will have property that are ripe for affordable housing. But probably if you're a nonprofit affordable housing developer and you're competing versus a BlackRock, you're going to lose. So we have a program called LAP, where it's a land acquisition program, where essentially we can help tie up land and pay for the lease. So that way that land holder can then say, yes, I'm going to give it to this person while they figure out their capital stack. That's one. The other one is also the CHIP program. So even if you want to build housing, depending on where you are, you may not have sewer, you may not have sidewalks, you may not have electrical. So we can also help fund some of those things as well. But what I'll say pretty clearly is that, yes, we have all these great programs with great intentions. Just do the math. If we need 45,000 housing units every single year in Washington State, and the Housing Trust Fund only funds 2% of that, there's no way that we could do it by ourselves. We need the private markets, right? And the private market needs certainty. The private market needs a cap rate that makes sense. And the private market needs to be able to have a permitting process that works. So there's all these things that we could do at Commerce, but a lot of it is we're going to be, in partnership with our developers as well.
Thank you. And before someone else asks their question, I just want to thank you for rural set-asides. That's really helpful. And please keep going in that direction. Rural, I'd say probably all the programs that you administer, but certainly in housing, we really need those. The technical assistance funds are really exceptional as well and really helpful. So just we'll say the word rural one more time.
Yes. Understood. Yeah. I'm sorry, I couldn't see your.
Yeah, my name is Jane. Thank you, from San Juan County. Our county, like others here tonight, and part of WSAC, are currently going through the process of updating our comprehensive plan.
You are, yeah.
I'm a relatively new council person, not as new as my colleague here, but still feel very, very new. And I have two new seatmates who were just elected and started in January. And so the three of us are embarking on this update process with our organization.
Do any of you have housing backgrounds?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. Okay. But I'm not talking specifically about housing. I'm talking about the really fascinating comment you made when you talked about Ezra Klein's book about abundance, which was just recommended to me twice yesterday.
Yeah.
And
You're not going to learn anything. I mean, like, it just restates things that we all know.
Right. And I was really struck by your comment about, protecting the process and losing sight of the task.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that updating comprehensive plans in the manner that we're going about it and being more concerned about ensuring that the contents of all the elements are hitting the mark and checking the box is losing sight of the task.
I agree.
And we are drowning in far too many goals and far too many policies and zero measurable outcomes when it comes to how we are developing these elements. Then you go out into the community to seek feedback, and then you get competing interests.
Yeah.
And the conflicts that exist and our plan was just finished being updated in 2022. And now we're doing it again because we took so long the last time. This time we got some wonderful money from Commerce to be able to hire a consultant to help us out. So it's going to actually get done more efficiently. But I and my colleagues are really, really concerned about what process we're going to use to work with our organization to prioritize goals and policies within the comp plan, particularly when there are tensions between them. We've got the new climate element, right? And our organization got 100,000 from Commerce to help with the overall thing. And the climate element is being given $300,000 grants just to do the climate element, which is it's bizarre. But anyway, so we have a lot of environmental priorities that are seeping into other aspects of our elements. And it's generating these tensions. I'm not saying the climate element is bad. I don't think it is at all. I think it's actually great that it's being introduced. But what I understand is, this was shared with me by a constituent who's been in our county for a long time, seen these plans go through processes like this many times. And what he was saying was there's no direction from the state of Washington as to what effectiveness might look like when you develop a plan. And that the Growth Management Hearings Board is responsible for ensuring that all of the elements have the requirements
That's
and
right.
content within them. But there's no obligation to create, measurable targets, outcomes, or what have you. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm interested in your thoughts on that because I'm very concerned about what we're going to end up approving at the end of the year. And I've worked in federal bureaucracies before, and I just think having clear, concise policies that are reflective of clear, concise goals and that enable you as an organization to stand up programs and projects that you can implement with results-based management principles. I feel that's super important, but what we have is a potpourri of every conceivable goal and policy you could even think of across all these elements. And I ask myself, how are we meant to set our organization up for success? So that's a curiosity I have. And any thoughts you have on that, I'd welcome. And one other thing, WSBO lies within your department, right? Boy, oh boy, have they set up quite the process for counties.
Broadband office.
Yeah,
Yes, Bob.
Washington State Broadband Office,
Yeah.
my apologies. What I've heard from our partner, we don't deal in internet, but our local partner does, and what is being required to apply for BEAD funds, which are still called now, but they probably won't be anymore. That name is going to change apparently.
Yeah. Includes
The
that.
process, I think that is an area where if you and your colleagues can look at process, boy, oh boy, are counties and their partners being encumbered by massive amounts of process in applying for BEAD funding.
Yeah, so the reason why that exists right now is first off, you have the state statute that didn't even address the federal. So BEAD, most of that is actually federal requirements that we're required to impose on other folks as well. But what I'll say just kind of in the abstract is that nobody ever pushes back. Whenever anybody puts another layer of bureaucracy, nobody says, stop, don't do that. They say, yes, that sounds like a great idea. Let's keep doing that. So part of my comment earlier around how for us to actually do the things that we want to do, we certainly have to create some tension and friction amongst friends because there are people who advocate for things that are righteous and good, but is this the most important thing right now? The answer is probably no. And we have not had a governor in the last few years that is going to be so forward thinking when it comes to specifically housing, but also around the metrics associated with it as well. So he is structuring the agencies to work better together. There's a reason why I'm the director of commerce, why Casey Sixkiller is at Ecology and Kurt Beckett is at FSEC, because we all want to build things. That tension is new. That was not there before in the sense that we have people who want to push back. So that's one. The other one too is that what people don't really see and that they oftentimes attribute is that there's these layers that you have to get through, right? So my team yesterday testified in a committee around contracting for nonprofits of the state and the ability for us to use advanced payments. So it was funny because I was watching this, and this is something I've been trying to advocate for multiple years, but never made the priority list. So the first panel were folks that have very similar feedback to you around contracting with Washington State. Very upset, very upset. And then my staff came up and said, this is where in the Constitution it says this is in the RCW that says this. So we've had bills in the past to change this. The legislature has chosen not to. And my point in that kind of comment was that a lot of this stuff is actually fixable, right? But folks aren't working hard enough to address kind of that tension, and instead they back off. So one of my perspectives when I was in legislature, so I played poker pretty competitively when I was in college and after college. And one of the things that you do in poker is always be the aggressor. You always be the aggressor because by human nature, most people fold. And I see that in the legislature all the time as well, is that people are too scared to be aggressive to actually change something. So they just do nothing. Usually what happens in the legislature when there's something scary that happens, there's one of two things. You ban it, which is not usually what you want to do, or you do nothing, which is most likely the case. So what I've told folks is that in the legislature in any given year, you see about 2,000 or 3,000 bills, right? So there's about 2,000 or 3,000 bills that are introduced in the legislature. You only pass about 200 to 300, so less than 10%. So a lot of the things that you're describing that are important, that are really good, they don't really end up with ribbon cuttings. And they don't end up in the media, and they don't get clicks on social media either. So it's hard to prioritize those things. So those things that you're describing, we need to have a more concerted effort. And I think because of this book, we are around how do we remove some of these barriers, not add on more. So my goal at Commerce and this idea that I pitched to the governor's staff is we basically have pilot programs where we do it exactly how I think we should do it, with less bureaucracy, less red tape. And we do it in jurisdictions that are going to be friendly, just to prove that we can, just to have a blueprint that we can then give to other folks, so that when somebody complains about why don't we have all of these XYZ hurdles that we don't need, you can point back and say, well, they did it over here. It made a lot of sense. So if you look at Washington State, we do a lot of pilot programs. Most of them are just because the bills died. But in some cases, it's because you want to show value. If you can point to success, it makes it less scary. So right now, it's scary to push back against enviros. It's scary to push back against local communities with lawyers. It is scary to push back against unions sometimes, right? So if we can show that there's a model where it actually works with the outcomes that we want, that's how you show success. So my goal at Commerce is to do things that other folks likely wouldn't do, just to prove that we can do it better. That's how I think we can move forward.
Thanks. I just wanted to say, yeah, thank you for coming. It's actually really refreshing hearing you talk. So thanks,
Oh,
thanks a lot.
It's
Yeah.
mainly because I don't like being a politician. It's just like, I'd rather just fix the things, but I understand how this all works.
So Director, it is 7:03.
Yeah.
We had you for an hour until 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
We do have one other question if you have time,
Yes.
if that's okay.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Thank you, Dan Sutton from Douglas County.
Hello.
Hello, and I agree. What I'm hearing is refreshing. It gives me some hope. What would it be? About 6 years ago, the state engaged the Ruckelshaus Institute to do a comprehensive review of the growth management process. Many of us participated in that, I suspect. The summary that they put out had some very good ideas and information in it. It seems to have collected dust since it was released. None of us, I don't think, have seen any of those ideas come to fruition within our counties. We talk about housing a lot and affordable housing, and to be honest with you, I don't know what that means. I mean, I hear it, and to me, it's a catchphrase.
Yeah.
It's a platitude. You've got public housing, you got public-private partnerships, you have private housing, and as you've alluded to in some of your frustrations that you've seen coming onto this position, really what we're coming up against are institutionalized barriers in a lot of the development for housing. Housing isn't about artificially assigning a socioeconomic class or number to a specific amount of homes being built. Housing is about inventory, pure and simple. The more roofs you have, the more people are housed. In my county, we're a rural frontier county, and we have some ideas and some projects that we want to move forward, and all of a sudden we start hearing LAMRIDs. Oh, you can't do that, it's a LAMRID. You can't do that because that's agricultural ground of significance, even though the farmers can't survive on it and they've cut their trees down and it's just barren grass. But it was agricultural land, so the logical place to move your housing to can't be built on. And we are one of those counties that has had those uncomfortable conversations with Commerce many times. And I'm sure if you do some research, you'll find some history on that. They're professional, but they're frank. They're very honest conversations. And from the way I hear you talk, you and I would probably get along just fine because we talk very directly.
Yeah.
But the long story short is, with that Ruckelshaus study, again, which was very informational, do you as the leader of Commerce have any plans of reviewing that and instituting some of their recommendations that would bring local control, or at least a certain amount of local control, back to the local legislative districts? Nobody knows how to develop their county better than the people that run the county. You were talking about instituting the rules, the laws, the legislation. The fact of the matter is the people that are sitting around this table, this is where the rubber meets the road. We are actually the ones that have to impose or enforce or make all of those rules, regulations, RCWs, WACs happen. And
usually unfunded.
and usually unfunded. Yeah, absolutely. But we try. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, we're here to serve our citizens just like you are. So we do the best we can with the resources that we have. And like I said, it's been very refreshing hearing some of the things that you said. It gives us some hope. It gives me some hope. I don't know about us is accurate. And I am more than happy to invite you to Douglas County to have a conversation and some of your team. We would enjoy that because I think there's a positive potential for a future.
Yeah, I'd love to. And I was at the Douglas County PUD looking at some of the facilities that they have there pretty recently as well. What I'll say, I'm probably one of the few legislators that actually read these reports, and it got really easier. It got a lot easier with ChatGPT, if I'm honest with you as well. But so the housing plan that we put into place that I'm going to be pushing for while at Commerce is informed by a number of reports. There's been 20 plus. So the Ruckle House was one. We've done one based off of 1220. So the transition team had a housing plan as well. What I found is that there is no shortage of studies for us to figure out how we do a better job. I've distilled that if you ever want to look, I can send you the deck, but also the House Committee on Capital, I presented it and the Senate had it as well. I don't actually think that I need to learn more about how do we build housing better. It's been overstudied. It's a matter of how do we actually just deploy and how do we do it. So I'll take a look and I'll send you kind of what I have based off of that report and that study. There's about 20 other ones that are kind of in it as well. And it kind of goes through the whole gambit. But I think my point being is that I don't disagree. You know, from a more pragmatic level, there has to be this balance between local and state because oftentimes you're not a monolith. Ferry County, Monterey, they're all a little bit different. So there needs to be some sort of baseline. But one thing that is clear to me is that if the local jurisdictions are not happy with what's happening, they can make it slower. So it's just easier to do it in a way that I think is much more of a partnership. And there's certainly an opportunity for us to do that there as well. So happy to come by and chat as well. There's a lot of stuff that's happening in Douglas County that I think is very unique and would love to be a partner in that work as well. Yeah. Wonderful.
Well, thank you, Director. Appreciate your time. I think Derek has a few words he'd like to finish with.
Yeah, Director Nguyen, thanks again for coming. Also wanted to just note for the group, don't think that if what you heard here today is a lot of bluster. Curtis and I had the chance to meet with him yesterday to deal with a problem in his department relating to housing dollars that you got for the COVID emergency. Because of some provisions in it, it's asking to claw back some of those dollars that were spent on potentially fraudulent cases, not fraud by the county, but recipients. It's a little bit of an unfair situation, but the director's got clear legal guidance, but he also very clearly outlined a path for us to try to find a solution that will work for everyone. It's not a huge amount of money. Most of you aren't affected, but the response that I saw was tremendous. So Director Nguyen, I can tell you that the folks at this table, the commissioners and council members and executives, the staff, you probably saw some knowing looks while you were responding to a lot of your responses. And that's because a lot of what you want to do, the folks here in this room want to do every day.
Yeah.
So please consider us your partner. And I'll reach out when I see you working on something that's our wheelhouse and say, how can we help? So please,
I appreciate it. No, thank you. And I think the unique thing about me and why I think I can do it a little bit different is that I have a level of, I'm not scared of any of this stuff. That I'm like the worst case scenario of even if I'm not at Commerce, I could do something else as well, right? So it's one of those things where I feel like I have pretty good guidance from our governor around what we need to do. I feel like I have a technical expertise in this space, also in the legislature, where, you know, most folks in this role are scared because their job is to be a figurehead. I do not see my job as a figurehead. My job is to get our stuff done. So thank you, Derek, and all your work as well. Yeah.
we hope you come back. You
Yeah.
sound a little like a county commissioner.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for the time tonight.
Thanks, everybody.
And look, he didn't even have to pick this up in the back row.
Yeah.
So,
If
good
you have
job,
any
guys.
questions, feel free to email me or my team. We'll be happy to respond as well. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Wow.
Okay, let's see.